The woman in my husband's phone was wearing my anniversary gift, the diamond necklace he told me he forgot to buy. There it was, sparkling on her neck, in a photo time-stamped on our 26th wedding anniversary. That was the night he said he had to close a deal. Turns out, he did close a deal, just not a business one. For 18 months, my husband hid a mistress, a secret condo, and $4.2 million in offshore accounts. He thought I was just a housewife, too stupid to notice, too weak to fight back. He was wrong. When I confronted him, he did not apologize. He laughed. He said, "I built an empire. You built a scrapbook. Who do you think wins in court?" Then he kicked me out of my own house, froze my bank accounts, turned my own daughter against me with fake evidence. He thought he had destroyed me. But here's what my cheating husband forgot. I used to be an accountant, and accountants always find the receipts. What happened next shocked everyone, including him. Stay until the end, because the final twist will change how you see this entire story. This is the story of how the king's mistress destroyed my marriage. So, I destroyed his empire. Lesson and value. Here's the truth this story teaches us. The quietest woman in the room is often the most dangerous. When you feel invisible, when you feel powerless, when everyone underestimates you, that is when you have the greatest advantage, because they never see you coming. This story is for every woman who has ever been told she is not enough, who has been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated by someone who claimed to love her. You are stronger than you know, and your comeback can be greater than any setback. The woman in my husband's phone was wearing my anniversary gift, the diamond necklace I thought he had forgotten to give me, the one I had hinted about for months, the one I had circled in the catalog and left on his nightstand. There it was, sparkling against her tanned collarbone, in a photograph time-stamped on our 26th wedding anniversary. That was the night Richard said he had to close a deal. Turns out, he did close a deal, just not a business one. My name is Margaret Coleman. My friends call me Maggie. My husband calls me Mags when he remembers I exist, which lately has not been often. And this is the story of how I lost everything: my marriage, my home, my children's trust, and nearly my sanity. But here is what my husband did not count on. I am an accountant, and accountants always find the receipts. It started on a Sunday evening in late September, the kind of golden Connecticut afternoon that makes you believe in the lie of the perfect American life. I was clearing dinner dishes, pot roast and mashed potatoes, Richard's favorite. He had barely touched it, too busy checking his phone under the table like a teenager hiding from his parents. I had noticed, of course, I had been noticing for months. The gym membership he suddenly needed at 52 years old. The protein shakes, cluttering our refrigerator, when this was a man who once called salad rabbit food. The business trips that seemed to multiply like rabbits themselves. But I said nothing. I had spent 26 years saying nothing. Richard left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to use the bathroom. It was not locked. Why would it be? I was just Maggie, his wife, the woman who made his pot roast and ironed his shirts and smiled at his business partners. I was not a threat. I was furniture. The screen lit up with a text notification. I glanced at it, not snooping, just a reflex, a photograph, a woman, and around her neck, catching the light like a cruel joke, my necklace. My hands moved before my brain caught up. I picked up the phone. I scrolled, and my entire world collapsed in the space of 30 seconds. Her name was Vanessa Blake. She was 34 years old, which I learned from her Instagram profile. That Richard had apparently been stalking for 18 months. She worked at his company, executive assistant. Of course she was. The texts went back a year and a half. 18 months of lies. I cannot wait to see you tonight, baby. The wife thinks I am in Boston. The wife. Not Maggie. Not even she. Just the wife. Like I was a piece of furniture he had to work around, I scrolled further. Photographs of them at restaurants I had never been to. Hotel rooms in cities where he claimed to have meetings. Her in lingerie, in his shirt, in my necklace. Always my necklace. And then I found the condo. A text from 3 months ago. The new place is ready. Victory Holdings, LLC. Our little secret. Victory Holdings. He had named his love nest after winning, as if cheating on his wife of 26 years while she clipped coupons was some kind of championship. I heard the bathroom door open. I placed the phone back exactly where it was. I finished the dishes. I said goodnight to our daughter Caroline, who was visiting for the weekend. I kissed Richard on the cheek, and I nearly vomited from the contact. Then I went to our bathroom, locked the door, slid down against the cold tile, and shattered into 1,000 pieces. I did not cry. I could not cry. It was like the tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me, blocked by a wall of ice that had formed the moment I saw that necklace. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2, long enough for Richard to fall asleep, his snores rumbling through the door like nothing was wrong. Because for him, nothing was wrong. He had his wife at home, his mistress downtown, and a shell company to hide it all. He had everything. I had nothing except the beginning of a plan. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. For months, something had felt wrong. The late nights, the distracted dinners, the way he looked through me instead of at me. But I had convinced myself I was being paranoid, suspicious, a nagging wife. Ladies, if something feels off in your marriage, it probably is. Your gut is smarter than your heart. I wish someone had told me that 26 years ago. That night, I made a decision. I was not going to confront him. I was not going to scream or cry or throw things. Richard was a businessman. He would handle me the way he handled hostile negotiations. He would lie, deflect, gaslight, and ultimately win. No, if I was going to survive this, I needed to be smarter. I needed to be strategic. I needed to become someone Richard had never seen before. I needed to become dangerous. The next morning, I made coffee. I smiled. I kissed my husband goodbye as he left for the gym, knowing exactly where he was really going. And then I walked next door to Helen Crawford's house. Helen had been my neighbor for 15 years and my closest friend for 10. She was 62, divorced, and possessed the kind of sarcastic wisdom that only comes from surviving your own personal apocalypse. She opened the door in a bathrobe, coffee in one hand, a cigarette she was supposedly quitting in the other. "Jesus, Maggie," she said, looking me up and down. "You look like hammered hell. Get in here." I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. The phone, the texts, the necklace, the condo called Victory Holdings like some kind of sick joke. Helen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stubbed out her cigarette and looked at me with eyes that had seen this movie before. "Is he dead?" she asked. "Please tell me he is dead. I have been waiting 15 years to bake a casserole for your widowhood." "He is not dead," I said. Damn, I made a really good tuna casserole once. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Almost. "Okay," Helen said, leaning forward. "First thing, do not confront him, not yet. I made that mistake with my ex. Gave him time to hide everything. You need to be smart, honey. You need to be strategic." Strategic, I repeated. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a weapon I did not know how to hold. Helen reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "The system is not designed to protect us, Maggie. It is designed to protect assets. And right now, you are an asset. His asset. Time to change that." Helen taught me the most important lesson of my life that morning. In a divorce, the person with information wins. The person with emotions loses. Feel your feelings later. Right now, gather your evidence. So that is exactly what I did. For the next 2 weeks, I became someone I did not recognize. On the surface, I was still Maggie Coleman, dutiful wife. I made breakfast. I attended my book club. I smiled at Richard across the dinner table and asked about his day. I even complimented his weight loss from all that gym time, watching his face for any flicker of guilt. There was none. He had been lying for so long, the truth had become a foreign language. But underneath, I was someone else entirely. I was an accountant who had spent 15 years at a top firm before giving it all up to raise children and support my husband's dreams. And now, for the first time in decades, I was using those skills again. I started with his home office. Richard left for the gym every morning at 6. That gave me 2 hours alone in the house before I needed to be anywhere. 2 hours to search, document, and photograph everything I could find. His laptop password was our anniversary date. The irony nearly killed me. I found the second credit card first, a platinum card I had never seen, registered to an address I did not recognize. The statement showed a pattern of charges that painted a picture of a life I knew nothing about. Jewelry stores, hotels, restaurants where a single meal cost more than our weekly grocery budget. Every charge was on a date when Richard claimed to be traveling for business. I documented everything. Screenshots saved to a new email account I created specifically for this purpose. Maggie Recipes, 2024@gmail.com. Something boring, something he would never think to look for, because apparently I was already cooking up something. The condo was next. Victory Holdings, LLC. I traced it through public records, following the paper trail like breadcrumbs through a dark forest. The LLC was registered to another LLC, which was registered to yet another. A tangled web designed to be impenetrable. But I had spent 15 years untangling financial webs for corporations worth billions. Richard's little shell game was amateur hour. I found 6 LLCs in total. 6 companies that existed only on paper, funneling money away from our marital assets and into accounts I had never known existed. The estimated hidden amount made me physically sick. $4.2 million. $4.2 million hidden while Richard complained about the grocery bills, while he said we could not afford to visit my mother for Christmas, while I clipped coupons out of habit because he had made me feel guilty for every single purchase. He had been robbing me for years, and I had been too blind, too trusting, too beaten down to see it. I wish I could tell you I was strong during this time, that I handled everything with grace and determination. But the truth is, there were nights when I sat in Helen's kitchen at 2 a.m, drinking wine and crying until I had nothing left. Why? I kept asking. We had a good life. We had children. Why was it not enough? Helen had no answers. Some men are just broken, Maggie, she said. It has nothing to do with you. It is a hole inside them that no woman can fill. Not you, not Vanessa, not anyone. I wanted to believe her. I was not sure I did. 3 weeks after my discovery, I decided it was time to bring in the professionals. Helen connected me with David Lawson, a forensic accountant she knew through her ex-husband's bankruptcy proceedings. David was 45, methodical, and possessed the kind of dry humor that made even the darkest situations slightly bearable. Mrs. Coleman, he said at our first meeting, I have seen your husband's public financials. Impressive. Now let us find the private ones. I was an accountant, I told him, before. He paused, looking at me differently. Good. Then you know what I'm looking for. We worked together for 2 weeks. David dug into places I did not have access to: bank records, corporate filings, the kind of financial forensics that required subpoena power and professional credentials. What he found confirmed everything I had suspected, and more. Victory Holdings was just one of 6 shell companies. Richard had been consulting for his own fake businesses, paying himself fees that never appeared on our joint tax returns. The money flowed through a maze of accounts, eventually landing in a brokerage fund in the Cayman Islands. "This is systematic," David said, shaking his head. "He has been doing this for at least 10 years. Maybe longer. 10 years. A decade of theft. A decade of looking me in the eye and lying." "We have him," David said. "This is fraud, plain and simple. Any judge will see that." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. David recommended a divorce attorney. Patricia Hartwell, a woman known in Connecticut legal circles as the Shark. She specialized in high-asset divorces, the kind where husbands tried to hide fortunes from wives who had sacrificed everything. I went to see her the next day. Patricia was 50, sharp-featured, and possessed the kind of confidence that comes from winning battles most people think are unwinnable. "Mrs. Coleman," she said after reviewing my evidence, "this is excellent work. The hidden assets, the fraud, the proof of the affair. You have him. He will have to settle." "I do not want to settle," I said, surprising myself. "I want what is fair, half of everything, including the hidden assets." Patricia smiled, a predator's smile. "I think we can do better than fair." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe I was going to be okay. I had the evidence. I had the lawyer. I had the truth on my side. What I did not have was any idea how badly I had underestimated my husband. I made my first mistake because I trusted the wrong person. My daughter Caroline was 24, a recent law school graduate, and the person I believed would understand. She was a woman. She was educated. She would see the evidence and recognize the truth. I invited her to lunch at a quiet cafe downtown, neutral ground, a place where I could lay out the facts without Richard's shadow looming over us. I brought everything: the credit card statements, the photographs, the timeline of lies. I spread them across the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Bitements, which I suppose I was. Caroline's face went through stages as she looked at each document. Shock first, then disbelief, then something I did not expect. Anger, directed at me. "Mom," she said, her voice cold, "where did you even get these? Were you spying on Dad?" "I found them," I said. "Caroline, he has been cheating for over a year. There is a woman named Vanessa. He bought her a condo. He gave her my anniversary necklace." Caroline pushed the papers away. "Dad works 80-hour weeks to give us everything, and you are going through his phone like some paranoid housewife? Did you ever think maybe there is an explanation?" "An explanation?" I was stunned. "Caroline, there are photographs, texts, hotel receipts," but she was not listening. Her face had hardened into something I barely recognized. "Maybe if you had paid more attention to him, instead of your book clubs and garden committees, he would not have needed—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. "Needed what?" I whispered. "I am sorry, Mom. I just need to hear his side." She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there for a long time. The coffee went cold. The documents sat in front of me, suddenly feeling less like evidence and more like accusations. Around me, the world continued. People laughing, eating, living their normal lives. I could not breathe. My daughter, my baby girl, the one I had driven to ballet practice and volleyball games and prom, the one whose tears I had dried after every heartbreak. She had looked at me like I was the villain. I was not the betrayed wife. I was the suspicious nag who had driven her poor, hard-working father away. Here is something I learned the hard way. Your children are not your allies. Not at first. They have their own relationship with your spouse, their own fears, their own denial. Do not make them choose. Do not put them in the middle, even when it breaks your heart, especially then. I should have waited. I should have let Patricia handle everything through proper channels. Instead, I had handed Richard a weapon, and he used it that very night. He was waiting when I got home, sitting in the living room, in the dark, like something out of a horror movie. I knew instantly that Caroline had called him. So, he said, you have been snooping. I considered lying, denying, but what was the point? He already knew. You have been cheating, I said. I have been providing. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had been rehearsing this conversation. For 26 years, I have provided for this family. This house, the cars, the kids' education. Everything you have, Maggie, is because of me. I gave up my career for this family, I said. I raised our children. I managed this house for 26 years, he laughed. Actually laughed. Managed what? You had housekeepers, nannies, a gardener. You managed lunch reservations. The cruelty of it took my breath away. 26 years of my life, dismissed in a single sentence. Richard stood up and walked toward me. He did not touch me. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough to make me feel small. Here's what is going to happen, Maggie. You are going to stop this amateur detective nonsense. You are going to smile at the Henderson party next week, and we are going to continue exactly as we have been. And if I do not? He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same cologne that probably still lingered on Vanessa's sheets. If you try to divorce me, I will bury you. I built an empire. You built a scrapbook. Who do you think wins in court? He walked out, got in his car, drove away. I stood alone in my beautiful kitchen, the kitchen I had designed, the kitchen where I had fed my family for 2 decades, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because he told me to, because I could not stand to lie next to a stranger wearing my husband's face. But here's the thing Richard did not understand. He had just made his second biggest mistake. His first was cheating. His second was threatening me, because the woman who made pot roast and smiled at dinner parties, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone angry, someone dangerous, someone who was just getting started. I did not confront Richard again. I did not cry. I did not beg for explanations or closure or any of the things a wife is supposed to want when her husband betrays her. Instead, I prepared. Patricia Hartwell became my general. David Lawson became my intelligence officer. Helen Crawford became my safe house. For 2 weeks, we worked in secret, building a case so airtight that Richard would not be able to wiggle out of it. We had the hidden assets, $4.2 million in shell companies and offshore accounts. We had the affair, 18 months of photographs, texts, and hotel receipts. We had the condo. Victory Holdings, LLC, purchased Obeds with marital funds without my knowledge or consent. And we had a strategy. Patricia would file for divorce on Monday morning. By the time Richard knew what hit him, his assets would be frozen and his options would be limited. This is as clean as it gets, Patricia told me at our final meeting. He will have to settle. There is no other option. I went home that Friday evening feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. By this time next month, I would be free. My children would eventually understand. I would start over, rebuild my life, become someone new. Richard was waiting for me. He was not alone. A man I did not recognize sat next to him on the couch. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, the unmistakable aura of a lawyer who charges by the minute. Mags, Richard said, his voice dripping with false concern. Come sit down. We need to talk. I did not sit. What is this? Richard smiled. That smile I had once loved, now twisted into something predatory. You think you are the only one who can hire people, Maggie? The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Mrs. Coleman, my name is Gregory Wells. I represent your husband in the matter of Coleman versus Coleman. Coleman versus Coleman. He had already filed. I reached for the papers with hands that trembled despite my best efforts to stay calm. The first page hit me like a physical blow. Petition for divorce, filed by Richard Coleman, citing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility by the respondent. Financial irresponsibility? I looked up at Richard. You have got to be kidding me. There is more, the lawyer said. A motion for emergency relief. I flipped to the next document. Emergency motion to freeze assets due to dissipation of marital funds by Margaret Coleman. He was accusing me of hiding money. He was accusing me of the exact thing he had done. I found your little account, Richard said, still smiling. The one you have been using to pay that forensic accountant. That is marital money. Maggie, my lawyer has already notified the bank. As of this afternoon, you have no access to any joint accounts. I felt the blood drain from my face. He had outmaneuvered me. While I was building my case, he was building his own, and he had struck first. You filed for divorce first, I said, realizing the implications. In Connecticut, that gives you the home court advantage. Richard shrugged. I learned a long time ago, Mags. In business and in life, the first one to strike usually wins. The lawyer stood and handed me the final document, a temporary restraining order. Ms. Coleman, you are hereby ordered to vacate the marital residence within 48 hours. Mr. Coleman has concerns for his safety given your erratic behavior. Erratic behavior? I was shaking now. I have never done anything erratic in my entire life. Richard leaned forward. You have been snooping through my personal belongings, going through my phone, hiring investigators. That is not the behavior of a stable person, Maggie. That is the behavior of someone who is unraveling. He had turned everything around. My evidence gathering was now erratic behavior. My self-defense was now aggression. My truth was now instability. You should have taken my offer, Richard said as I stood there, frozen. Smiled at the party, kept your mouth shut. Now it is war. And sweetheart, I do not lose wars. I walked out of my own house that night with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. I had 48 hours to collect my things, 48 hours before I became homeless. I drove to Helen's house in a daze. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without a word. He beat me to it, I said, collapsing onto her couch. He filed first. He froze the accounts. He is kicking me out of my own house. Helen poured 2 glasses of wine, large ones. That son of a bitch. I have nothing, Helen. I have $47 in my wallet. I cannot access any money. I cannot even afford a hotel. Helen sat down next to me and took my hand. You are staying here? No arguments. We will figure this out. But I could not figure anything out. My brain was spinning, trying to find a way forward, and coming up empty. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Caroline. I listened to it on speaker. Helen's face grew darker with every word. Mom, I talked to Dad. He showed me texts between you and someone named Mark. He said you have been having an affair for years. Is that why you accused him? To cover your own guilt? I cannot talk to you right now. Do not call me. The phone slipped from my fingers. I do not know anyone named Mark, I whispered. There is no Mark. There never was a Mark. Helen picked up the phone and played the message again. Her jaw tightened. He fabricated evidence. That bastard made up an affair to turn your own daughter against you. I sat on Helen's guest bed that night, surrounded by garbage bags full of my life, and I understood something clearly for the first time. This was not a divorce. This was an assassination. My husband was not just leaving me, he was erasing me, and my children were watching him do it, believing every word. The next 48 hours were the worst of my life. I went back to the house to collect my things. Richard was not there, but the message was clear. My clothes had been stuffed into garbage bags, some of them ripped. My photo albums were in a cardboard box, water damaged. My mother's china, passed down through 3 generations, was shattered in a heap on the garage floor. Only the pieces too broken to save. I salvaged what I could, loaded it into my car, drove away from the house I had made into a home for 26 years. That afternoon, I tried to buy gas. My debit card was declined. I tried the credit card. Declined. I tried the emergency card I kept hidden in my wallet. That account has been flagged for review, the gas station attendant said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I had $47. That was it. My entire net worth, after 26 years of marriage, to a man worth millions. Helen paid for my gas. She bought me groceries. She set up the guest room with fresh sheets and told me I could stay as long as I needed. But even Helen could not fix what happened next. Tyler called first, my son, my sweet boy, who had always been closer to me than to Richard. He was crying. Mom, Dad showed me those texts, the ones from Mark. He said you have been lying to us for years, Tyler, I said, my voice breaking. There is no Mark. Your father fabricated those texts. I have never cheated on anyone in my entire life. He was silent for a long moment. I could hear him breathing, trying to decide who to believe. Dad seemed really hurt, Mom. He was crying. I have never seen him cry. Of course, Richard was crying. He was a performer. He had been performing our entire marriage. Tyler, please, I begged. I am telling you the truth. I need time, Mom. I just need time to think. He hung up. Caroline did not call at all. When I tried to reach her, my calls went straight to voicemail. Eventually, they stopped going through entirely. She had blocked me. My own daughter had blocked me. I spent 3 days in Helen's guest room, barely eating, barely sleeping. I tried to call Patricia, but her office said she was unavailable. I tried to call David, but the forensic accounting work had stopped since I could no longer pay him. I was alone. Completely alone. On the 4th night, at 3 a.m, I made a decision. I would give up. I would sign whatever Richard wanted, take whatever scraps he offered, disappear to somewhere far away where no one knew my name or my shame. What was the point of fighting? My children hated me. My evidence had been turned against me. I had no money, no home, no future. I was reaching for my phone to text Patricia when it rang. My mother's name on the screen. Ruth Whitmore was 68 years old, a widow, and possessed the kind of southern steel magnolia spine that had been forged through decades of hardship. My father had died 15 years ago, leaving her alone, but never weak. Margaret Ann Coleman, she said before I could even speak. You answer this phone right now. Mom, it is 3 a.m. I know what time it is. I also know you are sitting in the dark, feeling sorry for yourself. Get dressed. I am driving up from Virginia. There is something you need to see. She hung up before I could argue. 6 hours later, she was at Helen's door. She looked exactly like she always did, perfectly put together, steel gray hair in an elegant twist, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She was carrying a banker's box. What is that? I asked. Your inheritance, she said, pushing past me into the house, or rather, Richard's debt. We sat at Helen's kitchen table, and my mother opened the box. Inside were documents I had never seen before, old papers, yellowed with age, covered in my father's careful handwriting. "When your father died," Ruth said, "I went through everything. Every file, every drawer, every box in the attic. And I found these." She pulled out a single document and placed it in front of me. It was a promissory note, dated 1999, 25 years ago. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Richard had borrowed $50,000 from my parents to start Coleman Development Corporation, the company that had made him rich, the company that he claimed he built with his own hands. He had never paid it back. But that was not the important part. The important part was a clause at the bottom, written in my father's precise legal language. If the loan remains unpaid after 5 years, the lender may convert the debt to equity at a rate of 15% of the company's total value. I looked up at my mother. "This says we own 15% of Coleman Development." "Your father was a clever man," Ruth said. "He never trusted Richard, made him sign this with a conversion clause, knowing Richard would never pay it back. And he never did. By the terms of this note, your father, and now you as his heir, owns 15% of Coleman Development Corporation. Before any marital division, 15% of a company worth tens of millions of dollars." "Mom," I whispered, "why did you not tell me before?" Ruth's eyes were fierce. "Because I was waiting to see if you would fight. A lot of women do not, Margaret. They take the easy path, accept the scraps. But you are not giving up. I can see it in your eyes. Now you have something to fight with." She was right. I was not giving up. Not anymore. Sometimes the thing that saves you was there all along, waiting for you to be ready. My father, gone 15 years, was still protecting me from beyond the grave. I picked up the promissory note and held it like the weapon it was. Time to go to war. Patricia Hartwell's office became our war room. It was not fancy. A converted brownstone downtown, cluttered with case files and legal texts. But within those walls, we built something powerful. Our team was small but fierce. Patricia Hartwell, attorney, 50 years of fighting for women like me. David Lawson, forensic accountant, back on the case now that my mother had fronted the fees. Helen Crawford, moral support, also responsible for coffee, profanity, and keeping morale high. Ruth Whitmore, secret weapon, carrier of documents and savage one-liners. And me, Maggie Coleman, the invisible wife who was about to become very visible. "Let me make sure I understand," Patricia said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "We have $4.2 million in hidden assets. We have fabricated text messages, which is fraud. We have the promissory note, which gives you a 15% equity stake before any division. And we have proof that Vanessa Blake was employed at his company when the affair began." That last part was new. David had discovered it during his forensic deep dive. Vanessa had been Richard's executive assistant. Their affair had started within months of her hiring. "In legal terms," Patricia explained, "this creates potential liability for sexual harassment. Even if it was consensual, the power dynamic between a CEO and his assistant makes it problematic. His board of directors will not be happy." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We expose him." Patricia's smile was sharp. "His board will not appreciate the hidden accounts, that is potential shareholder fraud. His business partners will not appreciate the mistress on payroll, and the family court judge? She really will not appreciate the fake texts." Helen leaned forward. "So we are going to destroy him financially, professionally, and personally? That is the plan." Helen sat back with a satisfied grin. "God, I love this country." For the next 2 weeks, we prepared. Patricia filed motions to unfreeze my assets, citing Richard's fraud. David compiled evidence of the hidden money, complete with charts and timelines that even a jury could understand. Ruth provided the promissory note, notarized and authenticated. and Tyler provided the final piece. He showed up at Helen's house one evening, looking nervous, but determined. He had not spoken to me in 2 weeks. I had assumed he had chosen his father's side. I was wrong. "Mom," he said, "I need to show you something." He pulled out his laptop and opened a series of screenshots. Phone records, metadata, technical information that looked like gibberish to me. "Those texts," he said, "the ones Dad showed us, the ones from Mark." I did a reverse lookup on the phone number. They were not sent from your phone, Mom. They were created on a burner app and sent from an anonymous number. The account was created 3 weeks ago, while you and Dad were already divorcing. The fabrication was recent. Richard had not been holding on to evidence of a fake affair. He had created it specifically to turn my children against me. "How did you find this?" I asked. Tyler shrugged. "Dad is still on my phone plan. I can see the account activity. When those texts showed up, they did not match anything in the actual phone records. So, I dug deeper. I pulled my son into a hug. Why? Why would you check?" He hugged me back. "This boy who is becoming a man. Because you are my mom, and I know you. You cannot even lie about liking Aunt Ruth's fruitcake." My mother snorted from across the room. I knew she hated that fruitcake. I had one ally now. One child who believed me. It was not everything, but it was something. The question remained. What about Caroline? "She is not answering my calls," I told Patricia. "Richard has completely turned her against me." Patricia nodded. "She is an adult. We cannot force her to see the truth, but we can present the evidence. If she is half the lawyer she claims to be, she will recognize fabrication when she sees it. And if she does not?" Patricia looked at me with something like compassion. "Then you have to be prepared to win this case without her, even if it means watching your daughter testify against you." I was not prepared for that. I did not know if I ever would be, but I was prepared to fight for myself, for my future, for the truth. The hearing was set for Monday morning. Judge Barbara Thornton presiding, a woman known for protecting exploited spouses and having zero tolerance for fraud. We had 3 days. 3 days to finalize our evidence, 3 days to rehearse our arguments, 3 days to prepare for the fight of my life. On Sunday night, I made a decision. I was going to see Caroline. One last time. Not to beg, not to manipulate, but to tell her the truth and let her decide. She deserved that much. I just hoped she would listen. Caroline's apartment was in a converted warehouse downtown. Modern, expensive, the kind of place a young professional lives when her father is paying the rent. I stood outside her door for a long time before I knocked. Part of me wanted to turn around, to spare myself the rejection I was almost certain was coming, but I had spent 26 years avoiding difficult conversations. Look where that had gotten me. I knocked. The door opened. Caroline's face went from neutral to hostile in half a second. "Mom, I cannot do this right now. I am not here to change your mind," I said. "I am here to tell you the truth. One time, then you decide." Something in my voice must have reached her. She stepped back and let me inside. Her apartment was beautiful and sterile, all clean lines and neutral colors. No personal photographs, no warmth, just like Richard's office. I sat on her couch and placed an envelope on the coffee table. "Your father told you I stole your trust fund," I began. "Here is the bank record showing your grandmother's money went directly into an account with your name on it, untouched." He lied. Caroline did not touch the envelope. She stood with her arms crossed, waiting. "He told you I had an affair. Here is the metadata proving those texts were created on a burner app 3 weeks ago while we were already divorcing. Your brother found it." He lied. She still did not move. "He told you I was a bad mother." I took a deep breath. "Ask yourself, Caroline, who drove you to every practice? Who stayed up with you during bar exam prep? Who held your hand after your first heartbreak? That is not fair, Caroline said, her voice thick. You cannot just show up here and try to manipulate me with guilt. I am not trying to manipulate you. I am asking you to look at the evidence, like the lawyer you are, and draw your own conclusion. I stood up and walked toward the door. Your father is a good businessman, I said. He built something real, but he is not a good husband. And right now, he is using you to hurt me. That is not what good fathers do. I stopped at the door and looked back at my daughter, my firstborn, the baby I had held in the delivery room, crying with joy. I love you, Caroline, no matter what you decide tomorrow. That does not change. I left the envelope on the table. Evidence, truth. The only weapons I had. I walked out of her apartment, not knowing if I would ever walk back in. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in Helen's guest room, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Caroline testifies against me. Caroline does not show up at all. Caroline walks in and supports her father. I had prepared for all of them. But preparing and accepting are two different things. At 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I got dressed in the simple blue dress Patricia had helped me choose. Professional, dignified, the dress of a woman who has nothing to hide. Helen drove me to the courthouse. Ruth sat in the back seat, clutching her banker's box of documents like a soldier clutching ammunition. Whatever happens today, Helen said as we pulled into the parking lot, you have already won. You stood up. You fought back. That is more than a lot of people ever do. I wished I felt like a winner. Instead, I felt like I was walking into my own execution. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, an American flag hanging limply in the corner. This was where my 26-year marriage would be dissected and divided. Richard was already there, Armani suit, legal team of 4. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who had already won. When he saw me, he smiled. That same predatory smile from the night he threatened me. I did not smile back. I sat at my table with Patricia, David, and my boxes of evidence, and I waited. Judge Barbara Thornton entered at 9 a.m. sharp. She was 58 with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she had heard every lie ever told in a courtroom. We are here in the matter of Coleman versus Coleman, she said. Petitioner has filed for dissolution of marriage, division of assets, and spousal support. Respondent has filed counterclaims, including fraud, dissipation of marital assets, and fabrication of evidence. Is that correct? Both attorneys confirmed. Then let us begin. Richard's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a hard-working husband driven to seek comfort outside his marriage by a cold, suspicious wife. He described my evidence gathering as stalking. He described my forensic accounting as financial sabotage. Mrs. Coleman became erratic, he said, going through her husband's personal belongings, hiring investigators, accessing private accounts. Mr. Coleman had no choice but to protect himself and his business. Patricia did not object. She let him finish his entire presentation. Then she stood up. Your Honor, she said, opposing counsel has painted an interesting picture. Now let me show you the photograph. She started with the hidden assets, Exhibit A through F, 6 shell companies, $4.2 million, funneled away from the marital estate over 10 years. She moved to the promissory note, Exhibit G, $50,000 borrowed from Mrs. Coleman's parents to start the company, never repaid, convertible to 15% equity. She concluded with the fabricated texts. Exhibit H, metadata, proving the affair accusations against Mrs. Coleman were created 3 weeks ago using a burner app from an anonymous account. Your Honor, Patricia said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, Mr. Coleman did not just hide assets. He fabricated evidence. He weaponized his own daughter against her mother using lies. This is not a divorce dispute. This is fraud. And we request sanctions, an unequal division in favor of Mrs. Coleman, and referral to the state attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. The courtroom was silent. Richard's face had gone pale. His lawyers were whispering frantically, but Patricia was not done. We also call Vanessa Blake to the stand. The courtroom doors opened. Vanessa walked in, looking like she would rather be anywhere else in the world. She had been subpoenaed. She had no choice. She took the stand, swore to tell the truth. Patricia approached her slowly. Ms. Blake, how long have you been in a relationship with Richard Coleman? Vanessa glanced at Richard. He was staring at her with something like warning in his eyes. About 18 months, she said quietly. And during that time, did Mr. Coleman ever ask you to help him with anything unusual? Anything related to his wife? Vanessa hesitated. Then something shifted in her face. A decision made. He asked me to help him create fake text messages, to make it look like his wife was having an affair with someone named Mark. The courtroom erupted. Richard's lawyers jumped to their feet. The judge banged her gavel. Order, Judge Thornton commanded. The witness will continue. He told me it was the only way to protect himself, Vanessa said, tears streaming down her face. He said his wife was trying to destroy him. I believed him. I wanted to help. Patricia nodded. And did Mr. Coleman ever tell you why he stayed married so long? Vanessa wiped her eyes. He said divorce was too expensive. He said it was cheaper to keep her. The words hung in the air. Cheaper to keep her. 26 years of marriage, reduced to a cost-benefit analysis. I did not cry. I did not react. I just sat there, finally hearing out loud what I had always suspected. I had never been a wife to Richard. I had been an expense. The courtroom doors opened one more time. Caroline walked in. She walked past her father without looking at him. She sat down behind me. I read the evidence, Mom, she whispered. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I took my daughter's hand and held it tight. Judge Thornton called a 30-minute recess after Vanessa's testimony. I spent it in a small conference room with Patricia, trying to process what had just happened. Caroline sat with us. She could not stop apologizing. He was so convincing, Mom. The tears, the texts, everything. I should have known. I am a lawyer. I should have asked more questions. You trusted your father, I said. That is not a crime, but I did not trust you. Caroline's voice broke. My own mother, I took his side without even listening to yours. Patricia interrupted gently. Mrs. Coleman, we need to discuss what happens next. The judge is going to rule today. Based on what we have presented, I expect a favorable outcome. But Richard's attorneys are going to push for a continuance. Try to delay. Let them try, Ruth said from the corner. That judge has seen enough. She was right. When court resumed, Richard's lawyers made a motion to postpone pending further investigation of Mrs. Coleman's evidence. Judge Thornton denied it in under 30 seconds. I have seen more than enough evidence to make a ruling today, she said. And frankly, I have seen more than enough attempted manipulation from the petitioner. Richard tried to stand, to object, to do something. His lead attorney physically held him back. The judge continued. In 22 years on this bench, I have seen spouses lie, cheat, and hide assets. But I have rarely seen such a systematic campaign of financial fraud and emotional manipulation. She turned to look directly at Richard. Mr. Coleman, you have shown contempt for this court, for your wife, and for the truth. You hid millions of dollars from your marital estate. You fabricated evidence to turn your children against their mother. and you used your position of power to conduct an affair with an employee while gaslighting your wife into silence. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Coleman. She began listing the rulings. Each one was a body blow to Richard. 70% of all marital assets, including the recovered hidden funds. The 15% equity stake in Coleman Development, per the promissory note. Full ownership of the family home. All evidence of fraud forwarded to the state attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Additionally, Mr. Coleman is ordered to pay all of Mrs. Coleman's legal fees, forensic accounting costs, and a spousal support amount to be determined in subsequent proceedings. Richard's face had gone gray. His lawyers were already packing their briefcases, distancing themselves from a losing cause. The judge banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I sat there for a long moment, unable to move. It was over. 26 years of marriage, 5 months of warfare, and it was finally over. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "You did it, Maggie." Caroline hugged me from behind. "I am so proud of you, Mom." But I was looking at Richard. He was standing now, his lawyers gone, his supporters vanished. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, deflated, the king without his crown. He walked toward me. The bailiff stepped forward, but Richard held up his hands. "You cannot do this," he said. His voice was hoarse. "After everything I built." I stood up. I was surprised to find I was not shaking, not crying, not afraid. "You built it with my family's money, Richard, on the foundation of my labor, with the support of my sacrifice. I am just collecting what was always mine." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. I walked out of the courtroom with my daughter on one side and my mother on the other. Helen was waiting in the hallway with Tyler. "Well?" she demanded. "I won." Helen let out a whoop that echoed through the courthouse. Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Tyler hugged me so hard he lifted me off my feet. I looked back through the courtroom doors one last time. Richard was sitting alone at the petitioner's table. His head was in his hands. I did not feel sorry for him. I did not feel vindicated either. I just felt tired. 26 years of tired. But underneath the exhaustion, something else was stirring. Something I had not felt in decades. Freedom. 6 months after the ruling, I stood on the porch of my home now, no longer ours, just mine. It was a cool spring morning. The roses were just starting to bloom, the ones I had planted 15 years ago when Richard said landscaping was a waste of money. They had survived his neglect. So had I. The front door opened behind me. "Margaret," Ruth called out. "Helen is making mimosas again. She says it is brunch rules and champagne is mandatory." I smiled. "Tell her I will be there in a minute." My mother disappeared back inside. Through the windows, I could see them. Ruth criticizing Helen's pouring technique. Tyler laughing at something on his phone. Caroline setting the table, her movements careful and precise. My family. Smaller than it used to be, but stronger. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change, some good, some painful, all necessary. Richard's criminal investigation was ongoing. The state attorney's office had found enough evidence of tax fraud to pursue charges. His board of directors had forced him out as CEO. The man who once commanded boardrooms now spent his days consulting with lawyers about how to avoid prison. He lived in a condo now. The Victory Holdings property, ironically, the love nest had become his only home. Vanessa left him 2 months after the trial. According to Helen's network of gossip, she was now dating a tech entrepreneur in his 30s. Some people never learn. As for me, I was learning every day. I learned how to manage my own finances for the first time in decades. I learned how to make decisions without seeking approval. I learned how to say no without apologizing. And I learned that happiness does not arrive all at once. It comes in moments. Small ones at first, then bigger. The first morning, I woke up without dread. The first dinner, with all my children, where no one once mentioned Richard's name. The first time I looked in the mirror and saw someone I recognized. People ask me if I am happy. It is a complicated question. Am I happy my marriage of 26 years was a lie? No. Am I happy I had to fight my own daughter to prove my innocence? No. But am I happy standing in my own home, financially secure, surrounded by people who love me? Yes. For the first time in decades, yes. I know exactly who I am now. Not Richard's wife, not the invisible woman, not the household manager or the social coordinator, or any of the roles I played for so long. Just Maggie. And Maggie is enough. Caroline appeared at the door. Mom, everything okay? I turned to look at my daughter. Our relationship was still healing. There were conversations we had not had, apologies that were still being processed, but she was here. She showed up. That mattered. Everything is fine, I said. Better than fine. She smiled. Good, because Helen just spilled mimosa on Grandma's blouse, and I think we need a referee. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised me. I had forgotten what my laugh sounded like. Coming. I took one last look at the roses, at the porch I had always loved, at the life I was building from the wreckage of the old one. Then I went inside to have brunch with my family. 3 days after the brunch, a package arrived. It was small, padded envelope, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I did not recognize. I almost threw it away. 6 months of divorce proceedings had made me suspicious of unexpected mail. But something made me open it. Inside was a USB drive and a note. I thought you should know. V.B. Vanessa Blake. I stared at the drive for a long time. Part of me wanted to destroy it. Whatever was on there, it would only bring more drama, more pain, more complications. But another part of me needed to know. I plugged it into my laptop. Audio files, dozens of them. Recordings. I clicked on the first one. Richard's voice filled the room. She has no idea. 26 years and she still believes the accountant story. I was skimming from the company before we even got married. I listened to all of them. Hours of recordings. Richard talking to Vanessa, to business partners, to people I did not recognize. Bragging about his schemes. Laughing about his clueless wife. Planning futures that did not include me. But it was the last recording that changed everything. This one was recent. I could tell from the background noise, the bitter edge, in Richard's voice. This was after the trial. After he lost everything. I will get it back. All of it. She thinks she won? I have got contacts, offshore accounts she does not know about. Give me 18 months. I will rebuild, and then I will make her pay. He was planning something. Even now, even after losing, he was not done. I sat back in my chair and thought about what to do. The old Maggie would have panicked, would have called Patricia immediately, begged for protection, waited for someone else to fix it. But I was not the old Maggie anymore. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. Patricia, it is Maggie. I need you to connect me with the federal prosecutor. We have more evidence. I explained what I had found. Patricia listened, asked clarifying questions, and then said something that surprised me. Maggie, you know this means more hearings, more testimony, more of your life under a microscope. I know. And you want to do it anyway? I looked out the window at my garden, at the roses blooming, at the life I had built. This is not just about me anymore, I said. Richard is going to do this again. To someone else. Some other woman who thinks she is safe, who trusts him, who has no idea what he is capable of. I paused. I have the power to stop him. So yes, I want to do it. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Patricia said, I will make the call, After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house and thought about everything that had happened: the discovery, the betrayal, the fight, the victory, and now another battle on the horizon. But here is the thing I have learned: you do not fight because you are guaranteed to win. You fight because some things are worth fighting for: your dignity, your future, your children's respect, and sometimes the women who come after you. The ones who will face the same predators, the same lies, the same systems designed to keep them small. Richard thought he was the king. He thought I was the pawn, a piece to be moved around the board, sacrificed when convenient. But here is the thing about chess that men like Richard never understand. A pawn that makes it all the way across the board does not just survive. She becomes a queen. And queens do not stop at winning one battle. They win the war. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, then do me a small favor. Hit the like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach other women who need to hear it. Drop a comment below. Tell me, was Maggie too ruthless or not ruthless enough? I read every single comment. Share this with a friend who is going through something hard right now. Sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything. And if you want more stories like this, stories of strength, revenge, and women who refuse to stay silent, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Part 2 is coming. You do not want to miss what happens when Richard's offshore accounts get exposed. Closing statement. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means everything to me. Remember, a pawn that crosses the entire board becomes a queen, and queens do not just win battles, they win wars. See you in the next story. Disclaimer: this content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons. We believe that every story should inspire, empower, and remind you of your own strength. Thank you for being part of this community.